The ocean, vast and merciless, became one of the most secret battlefields of the Second World War. Beneath its shifting surface, steel predators stalked each other in the dark. Submarines were both hunter and hunted, a weapon of stealth that could turn the tide of war or vanish without a single trace. For every victorious patrol reported by Allied or Axis commanders, there were others that ended in silence. Coded signals unanswered, crews never heard from again. By 1942, submarine warfare had evolved into an unseen chess match spanning the globe. The Allies relied on these vessels to disrupt supply lines and gather intelligence in waters dominated by the enemy. From the icy Arctic to the blazing Pacific, submarines operated under crushing pressure, both literal and psychological. Life aboard one was claustrophobic, the air stale, the danger ever present. Yet for those who served beneath the waves, there was pride, a belief that they were the silent guardians of their nation's coasts and convoys. It was in this perilous world that several submarines met their fate, each leaving behind a story clouded in mystery. Some disappeared in enemy territory, others in supposedly safe waters. Wartime records, already chaotic and secretive, only deepened the confusion. Commanders filed reports based on incomplete data, and families received telegrams with the same haunting phrase, overdue and presumed lost. One of the earliest mysteries emerged in the cold northern waters of the Pacific, the disappearance of the USS Grunion, a Gato-class submarine operating near the Aleutian Islands. But before her tragic voyage, there were others whose fates hinted at the dangers to come. In the Atlantic, the British Royal Navy's submarine fleet faced impossible odds against German U-boats and air patrols. The Mediterranean, too, became a graveyard for submariners as Axis powers tightened their grip on crucial sea lanes. In late 1941, shortly after the United States entered the war, submarine crews were thrust into missions beyond the limits of known navigation. Orders came down through encrypted transmissions, patrol sector assigned, engage and withdraw. Every message might be the last. The commanders of these boats were chosen for their nerve, their ability to make life or death decisions without hesitation. Many of them were barely in their 30s, leading crews of men who trusted them absolutely. The Allied submarine campaign was critical in strangling Axis logistics. In the Pacific, Japanese supply convoys became prime targets. In the Atlantic, German U-boats turned from hunters to prey as Allied sonar and radar improved. Yet the sea held its own dangers: mechanical failures, navigation errors, and even friendly fire. Mines drifting unseen beneath the surface could destroy a submarine instantly. A single depth charge, dropped by a patrolling destroyer, could rupture the hull and crush the men inside within seconds. For historians, what makes these disappearances so haunting is how quickly they could occur, and how little evidence was ever found. Wartime secrecy prevented full investigations. The fog of conflict concealed the truth. Ships might report hearing distant explosions or catching a fleeting sonar echo, only for nothing to surface. Days later, weeks even, headquarters would realize a submarine had missed its scheduled check-in. Then came the grim administrative process: striking the name from the active roster, notifying next of kin, closing the file with "lost due to enemy action." But the mystery did not end with the war. As technology advanced, sonar mapping and deep-sea exploration reopened old case files once thought unsolvable. Families who had waited decades for closure learned new details, sometimes confirming long-held suspicions, other times uncovering entirely new causes. In these discoveries, there was both relief and renewed sorrow. Each missing submarine tells a part of a larger story, a story of courage, of sacrifice, and of questions that the sea still refuses to answer. They represent the unseen costs of a war fought across every element: land, air, and the unforgiving depths. The silence that follows their final transmissions stands as a monument to the limits of human control in a world consumed by conflict. In the chapters that follow, we'll journey into the lives and last missions of 5 Allied submarines that vanished during World War II. Vessels once commanded by brave men, now lying somewhere beneath the waves. Each disappearance carries its own clues: radio transmissions cut short, final coordinates, intercepted enemy reports. Each, in its own way, reveals how fragile the balance between victory and tragedy could be beneath the sea. The first of these stories begins in 1942, in the frozen waters off Alaska, where the USS Grunion embarked on what should have been a routine patrol, only to vanish into the depths without warning. Her final messages would mark the start of one of the most haunting mysteries in American naval history. And decades later, the ocean would finally whisper part of her secret. It was June 1942, and the Aleutian Islands, a remote, windswept chain stretching between Alaska and the Japanese-held Kurils, had suddenly become a front line. The Japanese had invaded the islands of Attu and Kiska, marking the only occupation of US soil during World War II. In response, the US Navy ordered a series of submarine patrols to cut off Japanese supply lines and prepare for an eventual counterattack. Among those dispatched north was the USS Grunion SS-216, a new Gato-class submarine under the command of Lieutenant Commander Manette Abele, a seasoned officer with a reputation for precision and courage. Grunion departed from Dutch Harbour in mid-June. Her orders were clear: patrol the waters near Kiska, intercept enemy transports, and report all activity. It was her first war patrol, a test of her crew, her systems, and her command. The mission would prove to be her last. Abele's men were young, most in their early 20s, packed into a 301-foot steel hull that reeked of diesel, sweat, and oil. Conditions aboard were brutal. Cold condensation dripping from the ceiling, the constant thrum of engines, and the ever-present threat of Japanese depth charges. Yet morale was high. The crew had trained for this. They were part of a new generation of submariners, armed with cutting-edge sonar, radar, and torpedoes designed to turn the tide of the Pacific War. By July 10th, Grunion reported engaging several Japanese vessels near Kiska. Her coded transmissions were brief but confident: successful attacks, 2 enemy ships sunk. The Navy's Fleet Submarine Command received the updates with quiet pride. Then, on July 30th, Abele sent what would be his final message. He had been ordered back to Dutch Harbour, his patrol complete. After that transmission, silence. Days passed. Then weeks. Headquarters grew uneasy. There were no further signals, no sonar echoes, no debris. Search aircraft combed the frigid Bering Sea, but visibility was poor. Fog blanketed the Aleutians, waves towering over the fragile periscopes of any vessel beneath. The US Navy officially declared the Grunion overdue and presumed lost in August 1942. The cause, unknown. For decades, theories circulated among naval historians and the families of the lost crew. Some believed the submarine had been caught in a Japanese minefield. Others suspected mechanical failure or a torpedo malfunction. The official war record offered little. In the chaos of the Pacific Campaign, data was sparse, and the Aleutian waters were among the least charted in the world. Then, in the 1990s, a remarkable chapter began. Bruce Abele, son of the Grunion's commander, launched a personal search to find his father's submarine. Armed with modern sonar and deep-sea imaging, he organized expeditions to scan the seabed near Kiska. For years, the effort yielded nothing but darkness. But in 2006, more than 60 years after the disappearance, the ocean finally gave up one of its secrets. At a depth of nearly 1,000 meters, sonar detected a shape. Long, metallic, unmistakably man-made. When the remotely operated vehicle descended into the cold silence, the cameras revealed the unmistakable outline of a Gato-class submarine. The hull bore damage consistent with a torpedo explosion, but one that had detonated from within. The evidence pointed to a catastrophic malfunction. One of Grunion's own torpedoes had boomeranged, turning deadly against its launcher. The Mark 14 torpedo, used widely by US submarines early in the war, was notoriously unreliable. Faulty detonators, depth-keeping errors, and circular runs had caused disasters before, but wartime secrecy often kept those failures buried in classified reports. The tragedy of Grunion may have been one of its worst consequences. A submarine destroyed not by the enemy, but by its own weapon. As the ROV's lights swept over the wreck, they revealed a haunting sight. The forward section twisted open, the conning tower partially intact, and the name Grunion still faintly visible on the corroded steel. For the families of the 70 lost crewmen, the discovery brought long-sought closure. For historians, it confirmed a dark chapter of naval engineering and the price of wartime haste. But even with this revelation, questions remain. What was Grunion doing in her final moments? Did Abele realize the torpedo's fatal course before impact? Did his crew have seconds to react, or none at all? The Aleutian waters, silent and unyielding, keep their answers locked away beneath silt and ice. In 2008, the US Navy officially confirmed the identity of the wreck. The Grunions discovery marked one of the first successful civilian-led recoveries of a lost American submarine from WWII. Abele's sons placed a memorial plaque in honor of their father and his crew, ensuring their story would not fade with time. The submarine remains where she fell, her mission incomplete, her mystery, finally, if only partly, resolved. The disappearance of Grunion stands as a symbol of the hidden dangers of submarine warfare, where every mission balanced victory against the void. Yet she was not the only one to vanish that year. Thousands of miles away, in the warm, contested waters of the Mediterranean, another Allied submarine, HMS Thorn, sailed into battle and disappeared without a trace. And unlike Grunion, her fate would remain unsolved to this very day. In early 1942, the Mediterranean was a boiling cauldron of conflict. The narrow sea lanes that linked Gibraltar, Malta, and Alexandria were lifelines for the Allied war effort, and death traps for those who sailed them. Every convoy was a gamble, every patrol a test of nerve and precision. For the Royal Navy's submarine fleet, the stakes could not have been higher. Beneath the sunlit surface of the Mediterranean, German and Italian destroyers hunted relentlessly, dropping patterns of depth charges into the depths where British submarines lurked. Among those vessels was HMS Thorn, a T-class submarine commanded by Lieutenant Commander Robert G. Norfolk. Built at Chatham Dockyard and commissioned in March 1942, Thorn was a formidable machine, 276 feet long, capable of diving beyond 300 feet, and armed with 10 torpedo tubes. She joined the first submarine flotilla based in Malta, operating at the heart of Axis supply routes to North Africa. Her crew of 63 men, sailors, engineers and officers had spent weeks under constant air raids in Malta before setting out on patrol. In July 1942, Thorn received her orders: intercept Axis convoys off southern Italy and the Gulf of Taranto. Her mission coincided with the desperate struggle at El Alamein, where Rommel's Africa Corps relied heavily on supplies ferried across the Mediterranean. Each submarine attack on these convoys meant fewer tanks and shells reaching North Africa. On July 9th, Thorn sailed from Malta for what would become her final mission. She was sighted near Sicily 2 weeks later, engaged in aggressive attacks against Axis shipping. Italian naval records later confirmed that on July 15th, a destroyer escorting a convoy off Cape Spartivento detected a submarine periscope, likely Thorn, and launched a fierce counterattack. The destroyer, Pegaso, dropped a series of depth charges over a sonar contact at approximately 37°30 EN, 16°15 E. Moments later, an oil slick spread across the sea. The Italian captain reported bubbles and a large quantity of oil surfacing, a familiar but grim sight that often marked the destruction of a submarine. Yet no wreckage or bodies were found, and Thorn's name remained on British operational lists for weeks. Her next scheduled transmission never arrived. On August 11, 1942, the Admiralty listed her as overdue and presumed lost. No distress signal, no trace, no survivors. For decades, Thorn's disappearance remained one of the Royal Navy's great wartime mysteries. The Mediterranean was littered with wrecks, but the exact cause of her loss, and even her final resting place, eluded historians and divers alike. Some argued that Pegaso's claim was likely correct. Others suggested she might have struck a mine or fallen victim to an unseen air attack. The dense network of minefields laid by both sides made the region one of the most dangerous maritime zones of the war. Inside the Admiralty archives, Thorn's patrol reports paint a portrait of quiet professionalism. Her crew's last known messages describe successful torpedo attacks on merchantmen, and the tone of confidence shared by many submariners in that summer of 1942. These were men accustomed to long stretches of silence, their world confined to a narrow hull filled with sweat, diesel, and tension. They lived by routine, surfacing only at night to recharge batteries, diving deep at dawn to avoid detection. Every ping of enemy sonar, every distant explosion, meant a new decision between stealth and survival. In later decades, divers attempted to locate Thorn's wreck based on Italian naval logs and post-war sonar mapping. Several sites were surveyed, but none conclusively matched her structure. The The Mediterranean's seabed, uneven and scattered with wartime debris, concealed her well. To this day, no confirmed identification has been made, and her 63-man crew remains entombed somewhere beneath the Sicilian waves. There is a haunting symmetry to Thorne's story. She was lost at the height of the Allied struggle to hold Malta, the very base that sustained her. Within weeks of her disappearance, Operation Pedestal, the vital convoy that saved Malta from starvation, pushed through Axis defenses at enormous cost. Many believe Thorne's patrol helped divert enemy attention in those critical days, her final mission buying time for the convoy's survival. Lieutenant Commander Norfolk's name, along with those of his men, is inscribed at the Royal Navy Submarine Memorial in Gosport. It lists their patrols simply as Lost, July 1942. For their families, that single word, lost, became both epitaph and mystery. No wreck, no remains, only the unbroken sea. Some veterans of the Mediterranean submarine campaign spoke years later of a strange bond among those who served beneath. The waves, a shared understanding that the sea could take them at any moment. They knew that many of their comrades had vanished without a signal or trace, and yet they sailed again and again into the depths, guided only by orders and faith in their machines. The disappearance of HMS Thorne remains unresolved. She may still lie near the coordinates recorded by the Italian Navy, or perhaps deeper, hidden under sediment and time. Her story echoes the peril faced by every Allied submarine in the Mediterranean, a fight waged not only against the Axis, but against the ocean itself. As the war expanded beyond Europe, new submarine missions stretched across the Atlantic and into tropical waters. But the dangers remained the same: miscommunication, human error, and the invisible line between safety and disaster. In October 1943, another Allied submarine would vanish, this time far from enemy patrols, in the calm Caribbean waters between Cuba and Panama. Her name was USS Dorado, and her story would expose a tragic case of mistaken identity that still troubles naval historians today. In the autumn of 1943, the Atlantic War was beginning to tilt in the Allies' favor. New radar technology, coordinated air patrols, and better anti-submarine tactics were steadily strangling Germany's once-feared U-boat campaign. Yet, even as the tides turned, the ocean remained unforgiving, a place where a single error or miscommunication could erase an entire crew from history. This was the fate of the USS Dorado, SS-248, a brand new Gato-class submarine on her maiden voyage, bound for the Panama Canal, commissioned on August 28, 1943. At Groton, Connecticut, Dorado was commanded by Lieutenant Commander Earl C. Schneider, an experienced submariner respected for his calm under pressure. Her orders were straightforward: sail from New London to the submarine base at Coco Solo, Panama, transiting the Caribbean along the way. She was to arrive by October 14th, reporting any enemy contacts en route. It was a routine repositioning, or so it seemed. The Caribbean, however, was no longer the quiet backwater it had been early in the war. German U-boats had prowled its blue waters since 1942, sinking tankers and freighters off Cuba and the Yucatan. US Navy patrol aircraft from Guantanamo Bay and the Canal Zone were now tasked with relentless anti-submarine sweeps, often using radar and depth charges to attack anything that even resembled a periscope or conning tower. In such a tense atmosphere, the line between caution and catastrophe was perilously thin. On October 6, 1943, Dorado left New London, accompanied part of the way by her sister submarine USS Shad. The weather was calm, visibility fair. She departed ways 2 days later, and Dorado continued south on her own, last reported near the Western Caribbean. That was the last time anyone heard from her. A week later, concern began to grow at headquarters when Dorado failed to arrive at Panama. The base sent urgent radio signals, no response. By October 22nd, she was officially listed as overdue and presumed lost. What followed was one of the most perplexing investigations in American naval history, a mystery that suggested the possibility of tragic friendly fire naval. Records show that on the night of October 12th, a US Army Air Force's PBM Mariner flying boat from Guantanamo Bay attacked what its crew believed to be a German U-boat near the entrance to the Panama Canal Zone. The aircraft dropped 3 depth charges and reported a large oil slick afterward. But crucially, the position of the attack fell within Dorado's assigned patrol sector, and the pilot had not received the updated notice that friendly submarines were operating in the area. Another aircraft reported sighting a submarine around the same time, but hesitated to attack after seeing what appeared to be a US identification marking. Both sightings occurred along Dorado's projected route. The grim possibility emerged that Dorado had been mistakenly attacked by her own side. The Navy convened an inquiry. Investigators cross-referenced flight logs, coordinates, and signal reports, but wartime chaos clouded the evidence. The attacking pilot insisted that the submarine he bombed was of German design, a Type 9 or Type 7. Yet, survivors from other US submarines who had been mistakenly targeted in the past warned how easy it was to misidentify a periscope silhouette at night. No wreckage from Dorado was ever found. No oil drums, life rafts, or human remains. Only the mystery. Adding to the confusion were German U-boat records captured after the war. None of the U-boats known to be operating in the Caribbean in October 1943 reported being attacked near Panama. The Kriegsmarine's meticulous logs, so often a boon to post-war researchers, offered no corresponding loss. This absence of evidence only deepened the suspicion that Dorado had been the victim of friendly fire. Families of the 77 officers and men aboard waited for months, clinging to hope. Rumors circulated that the submarine might have struck a mine or suffered a catastrophic mechanical failure. Yet, in the absence of physical proof, every theory was speculation. Lieutenant Commander Schneider's widow received the Navy's formal notification in December. Your husband's ship, the USS Dorado, failed to arrive at her destination. The vessel is presumed lost. Years later, naval historians revisiting the case noted one chilling detail. Dorado's exact coordinates had been transmitted via open radio channel at one point during her journey, making it possible, though unlikely, that a German U-boat had intercepted her position. But with no confirmed wreck and no German claim of attack, the friendly fire hypothesis remained the most plausible explanation. The Dorado mystery encapsulates the perils of wartime communication. How a simple error in message distribution could doom an entire vessel. In the fog of war, with split-second decisions made in darkness and uncertainty, even allies could become unintended enemies. The Caribbean, tranquil and blue today, was once a stage for such unseen tragedies. In 2011, a private research team conducted sonar scans of the suspected area using modern equipment, but found no trace of Dorado. Her fate remains one of the most enduring submarine disappearances of the Second World War. A stark reminder that not all losses occurred in enemy waters. The tragedy of the Dorado also marked a turning point in Allied procedures. Communication protocols were tightened, identification systems improved, and friendly fire incidents sharply reduced. Yet for those who served beneath the sea, the lesson was clear. Even in victory, the ocean demanded respect, and mistakes could never be undone. As the war neared its end, submarine operations continued across the Atlantic and into home waters. But peace would not erase the dangers of the deep. In 1951, 6 years after the guns fell silent, another British submarine would vanish, not in combat, but during a training exercise off the English coast. Her name was HMS Affray, and though the war was over, her loss would stir conspiracy theories that linger to this day. By 1951, the world had moved on from the ashes of World War II. The British Royal Navy, once locked in mortal combat with the Axis, now patrolled calmer seas, maintaining readiness in a Cold War world of shifting alliances and nuclear shadows. Yet even in peacetime, the sea remained as perilous as ever. The story of HMS Affray was not born in the chaos of battle, but in routine, a training exercise meant to test endurance, not courage. And yet, in a single night, she vanished, leaving behind one of the most enduring mysteries in post-war naval history. HMS Affray was an Amphion-class submarine, commissioned in November 1945, too late to see combat. At 281 feet long, capable of speeds up to 18 knots on the surface, she was a proud relic of wartime engineering. In the spring of 1951, she was undergoing exercises to train officers in underwater operations and endurance patrols. Her commanding officer was Lieutenant Commander John Blackburn, a capable and respected veteran who had served in the Royal Navy since before the war's end. On the evening of April 16, 1951, Affray departed from Gosport, Hampshire, on what was considered a standard training mission. Her complement was unusual: 50 officers and men, along with 26 trainees from the Royal Navy and Royal Marines. Her orders were simple: conduct a simulated war patrol in the English Channel, proceed to the Bay of Biscay, and return within 4 days. Her last radio message came at 9:15 p.m. when she reported diving to commence her night exercises. After that, Affray fell silent. When she failed to check in by morning, the Admiralty grew uneasy. A search operation was launched immediately, one of the largest peacetime hunts in British naval history. Over 60 ships and aircraft scoured the channel, their sonar and radar sweeping through fog and rain. For 4 agonizing days, there was nothing. No oil slicks, no debris, no signals. Then, on April 19th, a patrol aircraft spotted a small yellow lifebuoy drifting near the Channel Islands. It bore the faint marking HMS Affray. That was the only trace ever found on the surface. The British public followed the story with mounting dread. The loss of a submarine in peacetime was almost unthinkable. And as the days dragged on, rumours began to multiply. Newspapers speculated about an explosion, a mid-channel collision, even espionage. The Royal Navy maintained silence until May 14th, when the wreck was finally discovered on the seabed, 50 miles northwest of Alderney, lying upright in 270 feet of water. The discovery answered one question, but raised a dozen more. The Admiralty's investigation revealed that Affray's periscope and snorkel were extended when she sank, suggesting she had been running at periscope depth, ventilating her batteries. The most likely cause, they concluded, was a failure of the snorkel mast, a relatively new and still experimental device. If the snorkel had snapped or flooded suddenly, seawater could have rushed into the submarine, short-circuiting electrical systems and disabling buoyancy controls. Within moments, Affray may have nosedived into the seabed, her crew unable to respond in time. Yet even this explanation left gaps. No distress signals were received, despite Affray being equipped with emergency buoys. Her experienced crew should have been able to surface under most failure conditions. Theories of a sudden catastrophic event, an explosion or hull breach, persisted. Some speculated that the presence of young officer trainees, some unfamiliar with the controls, might have led to an error. Others whispered darker suspicions: sabotage, espionage, even a covert cold war mission gone wrong. One theory that gained traction in later years claimed that Affray was secretly testing experimental surveillance equipment, an early periscope-mounted camera or sonar array, and that the device's failure caused the fatal flooding. Declassified documents later confirmed that the Navy was indeed conducting sensitive trials during that period, though whether Affray was involved remains officially unacknowledged. Whatever the truth, the Royal Navy moved swiftly to seal the wreck and declare it a war grave. No attempt was made to raise her. For the families of the 75 men lost, the official explanation brought little comfort. Memorial services were held at Gosport, and the names of the crew were engraved at the Royal Navy Submarine Memorial. Lieutenant Commander Blackburn, described by colleagues as steady, decisive, and dedicated, was mourned as both a teacher and a casualty of the deep. Divers who later visited the site in the year 1970s described a haunting scene: the submarine's hull resting intact on the sandy floor, her conning tower still upright and her periscope frozen mid-rise. The forward escape hatch was open, suggesting that someone, perhaps moments before the end, had tried in vain to save the boat. The sinking of Affray marked the end of an era for British submarine operations. It was the last Royal Navy submarine lost at sea, and its mystery, whether the result of mechanical failure, human error, or hidden mission, has never been conclusively solved. Official records cite a snorkel malfunction, but even the Admiralty's final report concedes that the exact cause cannot be determined with certainty. More than 7 decades later, HMS Affray still lies on the seabed of the English Channel, sealed, silent, and off-limits to divers. The currents swirl endlessly above her, erasing all traces of the night she vanished. Her story serves as a haunting reminder that even in peace, the ocean claims its own. With the loss of Affray, Britain's post-war optimism dimmed briefly, reminded that the sea, once an ally in war, could turn indifferent without warning. Yet these disappearances, from Grunion to Thorn, Dorado to Affray, all speak to a deeper truth. Beneath the surface, human courage meets the raw force of nature, and history itself can vanish in the space of a single transmission. And yet, even as decades passed, the sea still held more secrets. In the depths of both Allied and Axis records lay the forgotten stories of submarines never recovered, missions never completed, and crews never found. In our final chapter, we look back on these 5 tragic disappearances and how, even today, they continue to shape the mysteries of the deep. The ocean forgets nothing. Long after the guns of the Second World War fell silent, the sea continued to whisper its own stories of courage, loss, and the unanswered questions that linger in the silence between sonar pings. The 5 submarines whose disappearances we've traced, USS Grunion, Chas Thorn, USS Dorado, HMS Affray, and others like them, remain among the most haunting mysteries of the 20th century. Each one carried not only a mission, but a fragment of human history now entombed beneath the waves. By the war's end in 1945, more than 250 Allied submarines had been lost worldwide. Some were sunk in combat, others disappeared without a trace, their fates recorded only as overdue, presumed lost. For every wreck discovered in later decades, dozens more remain hidden, their final moments still the subject of speculation and sorrow. The ocean floor, vast and silent, became a collective grave for thousands of men who vanished, serving far from sight. When researchers in the 21st century began mapping wartime wrecks using sonar and remotely operated vehicles, the discoveries were both scientific triumphs and emotional reckonings. The identification of the USS Grunion in 2006, for instance, gave closure to families who had waited generations to know the truth. Likewise, expeditions in the Mediterranean continue to search for the missing HMS Thorn, using advanced 3D imaging to scan depths once unreachable. Each discovery transforms what was once myth or rumor into recorded history. Yet each also reminds us how little we truly know about the sea. The human stories behind these machines are what endure. In naval archives, yellowed letters and diary entries still tell of young men, engineers, signalmen, cooks, who left home for a world beneath the surface. "We sleep beside torpedoes," one submariner wrote in 1943. "If one ever turns against us, no one will ever find us again." His words, meant as dark humor, now read like a prophecy for vessels such as Grunion and Dorado. For every name engraved on a memorial, there was a family that received only silence in return. Even now, oceanographers and naval historians continue to debate the full causes behind these disappearances. In some cases, it was clear: an errant torpedo, a mine, a mechanical flaw. In others, the truth is layered beneath decades of official secrecy. Wartime logs were often coded, altered, or destroyed to protect operational intelligence. Submarines like HMS Thorn operated in contested waters where both sides claimed victories that may never have occurred. The ocean became the ultimate keeper of ambiguity. But for those who serve beneath it, the legacy of these losses endures as more than mystery. It is a lesson. Modern submariners are trained on protocols born from these tragedies. Improved communication systems, reinforced hulls, emergency escape procedures, and constant sonar monitoring. The technology has evolved beyond what the men of 1942 could have imagined. Yet the respect for the sea's unpredictability remains unchanged. Beneath thousands of tons of pressure, steel and human will still meet the same ancient force. The story of HMS Affray, lost not in war but in peace, perhaps best encapsulates the paradox of the submarine age. Even in the absence of enemy fire, the depths remained a frontier humanity could never fully master. Her wreck, declared a war grave, lies preserved as a silent witness to this truth. Divers who have approached it describe the atmosphere as unnervingly still, as though time itself had stopped on that April night in 1951. Across memorials in Portsmouth, Pearl Harbor, and Manila, the names of the lost are carved in stone. Hundreds of submarines, thousands of sailors. There are no graves, no coffins, only coordinates. Every year, veterans and families gather at these sites, tossing wreaths of flowers into the sea. As the blooms drift away on the tide, the ceremony feels less like mourning and more like communion with those who never returned. What makes these disappearances so haunting is not simply their tragedy, but their persistence. The war is long over. Nations have rebuilt, enemies have reconciled. Yet beneath the surface, the evidence of that conflict still lies untouched. Hulls resting silently on the seabed, engines frozen mid-turn, the instruments of war now claimed by coral and salt. The ocean keeps its own archive, written not in ink, but in rust and silence. In recent years, joint expeditions between former wartime adversaries, American, British, Japanese, and German researchers have begun exploring these lost submarines together. Their goal is not recovery but remembrance. Each wreck discovered is documented respectfully, often with a small plaque installed by robotic arm, in honor of those who served. For the first time in history, the deep sea has become not just a battlefield, but a shared memorial. The mystery of the lost submarines of World War II endures because it speaks to something larger: humanity's struggle against the unknown. Beneath all the strategy and technology, these were men navigating darkness, trusting machinery, and facing isolation few can imagine. They fought their wars in silence, in conditions of crushing pressure and constant fear, where a single mistake could end everything. As the camera fades through the dark water, a cinematic descent into the cold blue, the faint outline of a submarine emerges. Her name is barely legible, but the shape is unmistakable. A relic of courage and tragedy, resting quietly among the sands of history. The narrator's voice echoes softly. They were the silent service, the unseen guardians of the deep. And though they vanished without a sound, their stories still rise, carried by the tides of time. The ocean closes once more, indifferent but eternal. Yet somewhere beneath, in the stillness, the echoes of Grunion, Thorn, Dorado, and Affray remain, reminders that even in the darkest depths, the human spirit endures.